The world stopped for a moment when global supply chains failed, and inside that problem, the pressure between BRICS and the West became easy to see. In 2020, factories, shipping companies, and leaders reacted with confusion and worry. So why did this issue between BRICS and the West show up at the same time? Let's find out. The new global power shift. For many decades, the United States and Western Europe shaped most of the world's economic and political decisions. But today, a major shift is happening, led by the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries represent billions of people, control vast natural resources, and are now rising as a direct challenge to Western influence. This power shift is not sudden. It has been building for years as developing countries became frustrated with Western dominance in global finance, trade, and political decisions. BRICS is positioning itself as the voice of the Global South, offering alternatives to Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank. What worries the West is not just BRICS' growing size, but its increasing unity and ability to create a new world order. As more countries apply to join BRICS, the West fears losing its long-held economic control. This shift marks the beginning of a multipolar world where power is no longer in one place, but shared across continents. BRICS versus Western economy, the real numbers. When comparing BRICS to the West, the numbers tell a surprising story. BRICS countries together represent more than 40% of the world's population, while the US and EU together represent less than 15%. In terms of GDP measured by purchasing power, BRICS has already overtaken the G7, making it the largest economic group by real size. China and India are the engines of this growth, with India being one of the fastest-growing major economies and China being the world's manufacturing hub. On the other side, Western economies are slowing down due to aging populations, rising debt, and manufacturing decline. BRICS nations are also expanding their trade routes beyond Western oversight, building new partnerships in Africa, the Middle East, and South America. Many developing nations prefer BRICS because it offers cooperation without political conditions, unlike Western institutions that often impose strict rules. The West sees this as a threat because it challenges their long-standing economic leadership. This economic rivalry is shaping the future global balance. If you're enjoying this video, support us right now. Hit subscribe and drop a like so this reaches more people. How BRICS is challenging the US dollar. The US dollar has controlled global trade for over 70 years. Countries buy oil in dollars, save reserves in dollars, and settle international trade in dollars. This gave the US massive power, especially the power of sanctions. But BRICS is working to reduce this dominance. They openly discuss creating a new currency backed by gold or other commodities and increasing trade in local currencies like the Chinese yuan, Indian rupee, or Russian ruble. For example, Russia now sells oil to India in rupees, and China trades with many African countries in yuan. If more nations follow this, global demand for the dollar will fall. The West fears this because their financial strength depends on the dollar's global use. If BRICS succeeds in reducing dollar dominance, it will reshape global trade and reduce Western influence. Experts say the dollar won't disappear soon, but BRICS is slowly building the biggest challenge the dollar has ever faced. Why more countries want to join BRICS? Many countries such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, and more are joining or applying to join BRICS because they see it as an alternative to Western-controlled institutions. They are frustrated with the IMF and World Bank, which often impose strict economic conditions that harm local industries. BRICS, on the other hand, offers partnerships without interference in political systems. Countries want access to BRICS funding, massive markets in India and China, and the chance to trade without relying on the dollar. Many nations in Africa and the Middle East believe the West has used them mainly for resources, while BRICS offers infrastructure, investments, and fairer trade. The expansion of BRICS is also attractive because it represents a new global order where developing countries finally have a voice. As more nations apply, the West sees this as a major threat to its global leadership. The expansion could eventually make BRICS larger than the G20 in economic and political influence. China versus the West, the real behind-the-scenes battle. China is at the center of BRICS's rise, and its competition with the West is one of the biggest battles of our time. China's Belt and Road Initiative has invested billions of dollars in roads, ports, railways, and energy projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This expansion challenges Western power by giving China influence in regions traditionally controlled by Europe and the US. Meanwhile, the West is responding with sanctions, trade restrictions, and bans on Chinese technology like Huawei. The tech war is intense. China leads in 5G infrastructure and AI patents, while the US leads in advanced chip technology. Both sides are fighting for control of the technologies that will rule the future. China's partnerships with Russia, Middle Eastern nations, and African governments further strengthen its position. The West fears China's rise because it threatens decades of Western dominance. This battle impacts global politics, supply chains, and even military development. The world is witnessing a new Cold War, but this time the battlefield is economic and technological. India's dual strategy, friend of both. India plays one of the most unique and complex roles within BRICS. Unlike China and Russia, which openly clash with the West, India maintains friendly relations with both sides. On one side, India is a founding BRICS member and supports a multipolar world. It benefits from BRICS cooperation, especially through trade with Russia and developmental projects with China and Brazil. On the other side, India has powerful ties with the United States and Europe through defense, technology, and investment agreements. This dual strategy allows India to gain advantages from both blocs while avoiding full alignment with either. However, India's relationship with China remains tense due to border disputes and competition for influence in Asia. Despite these tensions, India stays in BRICS because it gives New Delhi a platform to shape global governance and represent the developing world. The West also sees India as a counterbalance to China, while BRICS views India as essential for its legitimacy. India's independent, multi-directional foreign policy makes it a central player in the world's evolving power structure. Russia after sanctions, how BRICS became a lifeline. After the Ukraine conflict, Russia became the most sanctioned country in modern history. Western nations cut off its banks from SWIFT, restricted its oil exports, and blocked technology supplies. Many predicted the Russian economy would collapse. Instead, Russia turned sharply toward BRICS partners, especially China, India, and Brazil, which became its economic lifeline. India increased its imports of Russian oil to record levels, paying with local currencies instead of the US dollar. China expanded energy, trade, and military ties, while Brazil continued agricultural cooperation. These relationships allowed Russia to bypass Western sanctions, restore trade flows, and maintain government revenue. Russia also deepened its strategy of de-dollarization, pushing for BRICS financial independence. For BRICS, Russia's situation became proof that Western sanctions are losing effectiveness. For the West, this was alarming. Their most powerful economic weapon was no longer working as expected. Russia's pivot demonstrates how BRICS nations can support each other economically, reducing Western influence and challenging the existing global order. This has made BRICS more attractive to other countries seeking independence from Western pressure. Oil politics, Middle East, BRICS, and the West. The global oil market is one of the biggest battlegrounds between BRICS and the West. For decades, the United States maintained dominance through the petrodollar system, where oil-producing countries sold oil exclusively in dollars. But this structure is now under pressure. With Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran aligning closer to BRICS, the oil landscape is changing rapidly. Saudi Arabia, the world's top oil exporter, joining BRICS is a major blow to the West because it signals a possible shift away from dollar-only oil transactions. Iran, already under Western sanctions, sees BRICS as a way to escape dollar dependency and strengthen its economy. UAE is using BRICS ties to expand global investment. If major oil exporters start accepting currencies like yuan or rupees, it could weaken the dollar and reduce U.S. influence over global markets. The West fears this because the petrodollar system has been a pillar of its economic power. BRICS is now shaping a new energy order where oil trade is more diverse, reducing Western control and strengthening the global South. Africa's turn to BRICS. Africa has become a major center of competition between BRICS and the West. For decades, African countries accused Western powers of exploiting the continent's resources without offering real development. China recognized this frustration early and invested heavily in African infrastructure: roads, ports, airports, power plants, and digital networks. Russia built military partnerships, and India expanded trade and technology cooperation. Many African nations view BRICS as a fairer partner because it does not impose political conditions or demand reforms in exchange for loans. This has made countries like Ethiopia, Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya eager to deepen ties or join BRICS. The BRICS New Development Bank also provides funding without the strict rules of the IMF or World Bank. The West sees its influence shrinking as African nations diversify their alliances. BRICS gains access to minerals, markets, and political support, while Africa gains development options beyond the Western system. If this trend continues, Africa could become one of BRICS's strongest pillars, reshaping global power away from Europe and the United States. Technology war: BRICS rising versus Western innovation. Technology is the most important battlefield of the modern world, and BRICS is quickly catching up to Western innovation. China leads the group with massive progress in artificial intelligence, 5G networks, surveillance systems, and electric vehicles. It has more AI patents than the United States and the world's largest tech manufacturing base. India is emerging as a software and digital services powerhouse, hosting global tech giants and expanding its semiconductor plans. Russia remains strong in cybersecurity, space technology, and military innovations. Brazil and South Africa contribute in biotech, agriculture, and scientific research. The West is trying to slow BRICS's technological rise by banning Chinese technologies, restricting advanced chip exports, and pushing allied nations to reduce dependence on BRICS tech. But these restrictions have also motivated BRICS to develop their own chip manufacturing, payment systems, and advanced research programs. This technology race is not just about innovation, it's about global influence. Whoever leads in AI, space, and digital infrastructure will shape the future economy and security systems. BRICS is determined not to let the West dominate these fields alone. NATO versus BRICS, two world blocs emerging. A growing number of analysts believe the world is slowly shifting toward two major blocs: NATO representing the military strength of the West, and BRICS representing an expanding economic coalition of the global South. NATO is a powerful military alliance led by the United States, with advanced weapon systems, global bases, and long-standing partnerships. BRICS, in contrast, is not a military alliance, but its economic weight challenges Western influence in global decision-making. Some experts argue that as BRICS expands and becomes more coordinated, it could indirectly support security cooperation among its members, especially between Russia and China. This worries the West, which sees BRICS as a platform that gives geopolitical cover to countries resisting Western pressure. While BRICS currently avoids military ambitions, the deepening economic ties naturally spill into diplomatic and security cooperation. Russia and China already conduct joint military exercises, and other BRICS nations support a more multipolar security framework. The world is not entering a classic Cold War, but a new era where military alliances and economic coalitions compete side by side. This emerging dual structure shapes international politics more than ever. Global trade routes. Who controls the future? Control over global trade routes has always meant power. Today, BRICS in the West are competing to shape the future of these routes. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is the largest infrastructure project in history, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through highways, railways, energy pipelines, and major seaports. This gives China, and by extension BRICS, a powerful strategic influence over trade corridors. The West sees this as a threat. In response, they launched initiatives like the EU's Global Gateway and the US-backed India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. However, these Western projects are still slow compared to China's rapid construction. Control of ports in places like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Djibouti, and Kenya gives BRICS leverage over maritime trade. Meanwhile, the Arctic route, led by Russia, could shorten global shipping times significantly. Trade routes decide who controls logistics, energy supplies, and market access. BRICS is gaining ground by offering infrastructure without political pressure. If BRICS dominates global logistics, Western economic influence will weaken, shifting global economics toward a truly multipolar world. Sanctions. The West's weapon versus BRICS counter-strategy. For decades, Western sanctions have been one of the most powerful tools used against countries that oppose Western policies. By cutting nations off from the dollar system, SWIFT network, and Western markets, sanctions have pressured governments into compliance. But BRICS is rapidly building mechanisms to reduce the impact of these sanctions. Russia's survival after massive Western sanctions showed the world that alternative systems are possible. BRICS nations are developing their own payment systems, like China's CIPS and Russia's SPFS, allowing countries to trade without using US-controlled networks. Local currency trade within BRICS has grown significantly. India buys Russian oil in rupees. China settles African trade in yuan. This weakens the power of dollar-based sanctions. The West is concerned because if more countries adopt BRICS-based systems, it reduces the effectiveness of sanctions as a geopolitical tool. Smaller nations see this as an opportunity to escape dependency on Western approval. BRICS aims not to break the global system, but to create parallel options where developing countries are less vulnerable to Western economic pressure. The next 20 years, who wins? Predicting the future is difficult, but trends clearly show that global power will no longer be controlled by one region. In the next 20 years, BRICS is expected to grow economically as populations expand and developing markets rise. China and India will likely remain major engines of growth, while new BRICS members add resources, energy, and structural influence. The West will still be powerful with strong technology, military alliances, and financial systems. But its dominance will decrease as more countries join BRICS-led trade networks and reduce reliance on the dollar. The world will shift toward a multipolar structure where several countries, not just the US and Europe, shape global decisions. Who wins depends on perspective. BRICS may win in economic growth, resources, and global alliances. The West may win in technology, military power, and innovation. The best outcome for humanity is not a winner-takes-all scenario, but a balanced world where both sides compete peacefully while cooperating on global challenges like climate change, development, and technology. The future will belong to those who adapt the fastest. The story isn't finished yet, and the next part explains what happens after this shift. Click the next video on your screen right now before it disappears. It continues the full story.